Welcome back. So tonight, as we do at Whitehall Meditation, I'm kind of a visual guy. And so I've asked Judy to pass out a handout. So when you take the handout, if you wouldn't look at it and just turn it face down, because it's really the secret to enlightenment. And I don't want you all to read it and then suddenly leave. I want to be able to give my talk. So we'll be referring to that, fairly soon. I might add as well that at Whitehall Meditation we have our own website. Actually, there's a link at IMCC for our website. I'm a member of IMCC, so it's just great to be able to come here and teach. So we have a lot of materials on there. So in terms of what I'll be explaining later, I have a full copy of this talk if you want to download it, and Judy is going to actually put it on the website, IMCC website, with the video or the audio of the talk. So let's address this particular scenario. Have you ever yourself or with someone else, they made the comment, "That makes me crazy"? And so you think, okay, let's take that sentence and what is the that? And is it really making you crazy? What is the process here? And the Buddha addressed this over 2,500 years ago. And I think of the Buddha, when somebody says, well, are you a Buddhist? I say, well, actually, it's more the teachings. And I consider the Buddha to be a physician who specializes in suffering. And in fact, that's what he said. He said, I teach suffering and the cessation of suffering. That's it. Before the Buddha started teaching, there was meditation. There was a number of the concepts. But the Buddha specialized in suffering. And so what he really gave was an outline or how we experience life. And in terms of experiencing life, he outlined this in 3 of what I consider to be his most notable teachings. The main one being the Satipatthana Sutta, or the 4 foundations of mindfulness. If you could only pick one of the Buddhist teachings, that's the one I would pick, because it contains about 98% of everything that the Buddha taught. He gave many thousands of talks, and a lot of them overlap, because when he was talking with an audience, he really focused on what he felt they could relate to and their level of understanding. So with the Satipatthana Sutta, in the 4th foundation of mindfulness, so the mindfulness of Dhammas, he really talks about and teaches how we experience life. And basically, we experience life through 5 ways. There's only 5 ways in which we can experience life. And if you come up with a 6th at our Q&A, please let me know. Because it's really, I think, very basic. And now scientists, as I'll say, are really kind of proving what he said with MRIs and other types of technology. So basically, these 5 ways in the Satipatthana Sutta, he called the 5 aggregates. And the reason they're called aggregates, which is not a real word that we use these days, is because aggregate means collection. So with each of these 5, it's actually a collection. So when we have perception, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight, there's a collection of perceptions. We don't just have one perception. We have a lot of different mental impressions that are going on. It's also called the 5 aggregates of clinging. And that means the problem and the reason we suffer is that we cling to these various aspects of how we experience life. We're attached to it. And as you all know, the Buddha in the 4 Noble Truths said the cause of suffering is we want life to be other than it is. We have this attachment to what we think the outcome should be, and really life is flowing along and not particularly going in that direction, and we get frustrated, dissatisfied, and so forth. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is perception. And if you look at the dictionary, perception is defined as a state of being or the process of becoming aware of something through the senses, becoming aware of something through the senses, and or a way of regarding, understanding, or interpreting something. And that all boils down to me is perception is a mental impression. We have a mental impression of something that we're made aware of through the senses. So how does perception fit in as to how we experience life? Well, we have a practice of mindfulness, a guide at Whitehall Meditation, kind of a 17-page thing which you can download, on our website. And so drawing from that, you can turn your handout over now. There's a diagram of these 5 aggregates. And so with this diagram, you can see at the top it said how we experience and react. And then you can see that there's various words numbered 1 through 5. So starting on the left-hand side, let's start with the sense organs. We have 6 sense organs. And those are, our body, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, and our mind is considered to be a sense organ as well. And these sense organs or sense bases are really good at detecting what they're good at. So basically, there's external objects out there, and if it's something visual, then our eye sees that sense object. If it's something we can feel, that has to do with the body. If it's a sound, of course, our ears. So we have the sense base and the sense objects. And so we call all that form. Form is a way that we can sense things. But things are going on all the time. You're sitting there right now, you may be looking at me, you may be looking at something else. You're looking at a lot of things, but you're probably not really aware of what you're looking at. And the reason you're not aware is that a couple of other things have to come into play. And so the second aggregate is consciousness, where you're actually conscious of what you're sensing. You're conscious of your seeing me as an image. But still, you may not be aware of that. So that's where consciousness there has to be a sense object seen by a sense base. There's consciousness, and those 3 things, when they all come together, is called awareness, where you're really aware of what's going on. So you can see in the diagram, we've got form plus consciousness equals awareness of the experience. And I'm defining experience very broadly. Experience can be just anything that you're aware of. And then we move down to the next 3 aggregates. And you can see that there's a box there, it's grayed out, and that's called conditioning. And so what happens is that 3 things occur. There's feeling, there's perception, and there's mental formations. And these occur in sequence. So going back, we're looking at something, we become conscious of it, and that is the pure experience. And what the mind does is it conditions that. So we take that experience and we put our own twist on it. And so this really gets at the heart of suffering. So with feeling, and feeling is not an emotion, feeling is basically a body sensation where we have either a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, or a neutral feeling. So it's not either one. So imagine that you're walking down the street and you see someone that coming towards you, and you've seen that person before. In fact, the last time you saw that person, you had a pretty violent argument with that person. And so can you imagine that feeling maybe at the pit of your stomach or whatever as that person comes toward you? And you can also have a pleasant feeling. If there's a nice experience coming up, you're going to go out to dinner and so forth, you go to a restaurant. So feeling is really the first thing that your body, if you listen to it, is telling you, hey, this is kind of an indicator of how that experience is going to go. And then the next thing that happens is perception. And as I mentioned, perception is the mind's assessment of what this experience is. And perception is dependent on your memory and your fixed beliefs. Because imagine if you brought someone from the North Pole and you took them here and suddenly you showed them something that they'd never seen up there, they would have no feelings about it one way or the other because they didn't have any memories of it, they didn't have any beliefs of it. So that's why I say conditioning is really how our mind does comparisons with our memories and our beliefs. And then out of that perception, what comes that we're all familiar with are mental formations, such as happiness, anger, or whatever. And then, if it's intense enough, that mental formation, that whole process can drive us to a reaction. So you're in a meeting with a group of people, and when I was working at the university, I used to have this administrative meeting, and I was the chairman, and there was this person that it seems like everything I said, they would bring up the opposite view. And I could feel this kind of burning sensation in my chest, and then there was my perception that this person was saying something that was contrary to what I wanted to get across or accomplish with the group. And then the mental formation would come up of frustration and anger. And the problem was early on that then my mouth started moving. And I started saying things that I regret. And that was a reaction. I was having a reaction. And pretty soon I learned, actually, when I felt that certain feeling, keep your mouth shut, Bob, because it's not going to do any good. And actually, that person and I became good friends. We became good professional colleagues when we just, got together, resolved our differences and so forth. But that's the process about how we suffer. This whole thing of this person would be at the meeting. I might even visualize him before he even said anything, but perhaps whatever he said, I'd be aware of that through consciousness, and then my conditioning process would take place because my conditioning was really going back into the memories, bringing it forth, and that's what I was reacting from. So recent scientific research have confirmed this. And there's a scientist at Tufts University and Harvard named Lisa Feldman Barrett. And this is my poor man's PowerPoint here. So this is really the book. Actually, this is on my Kindle, so I had to do an image of it anyway. I couldn't show you the book. But her book is How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain. And let me quote what she says about this. In order for the mind to make sense out of an experience, it has to draw upon memories and beliefs to compare. To understand why this is the case, let's take your brain's perspective for a moment. Like those ancient mummified Egyptian pharaohs, the brain spends eternity entombed in a dark, silent box. It cannot get out and enjoy the world's marvels directly. It learns what is going on in the world only indirectly, via scraps of information from the light, vibrations, and chemicals that become sights, sounds, smells, and so on. Your brain must figure out the meaning of these flashes and vibrations, and its main clues are your past experiences, which it constructs as simulations within its vast network of neural connections. Your brain has learned that a single sensory clue, such as a loud bang, can have many different causes. A door being slammed, a bursting balloon, a hand clap, a gunshot. It distinguishes which of these causes is the most relevant only by their probability in different contexts. It asks, which combination of my past experiences provides the closest match to this sound, given this particular situation with its accompanying sights, smells, and other sensations? And so, trapped within the skull, with only past experiences as a guide, your brain makes predictions. So you can think of your brain, your mind, as a friend, but a friend who has incomplete information. And so are you going to listen to your friend if you know that they're always dealing with incomplete information and really making the best prediction that they can? Well, if that friend were a physical friend whispering in your ear, you'd say, no, I don't. You get it wrong so many times. We need to investigate this further. But what do? We have this concept that we believe our mind. Whatever our mind says, that's what we believe. How many of you have been at a party or whatever, and you see someone, kind of approaching you, and you get this impression about that person. And then after you talk to them, it's completely 180 degrees the other way. This person has a lot of common interests and really it works out well. But you can see that initial hesitation you might have had to approach that person or to let them talk to you because of what your mind is doing. Your mind is making that prediction because what is your mind all about? As Rick Hansen said, Your mind is hardwired to give you survival skills. It wants to protect you from danger. It wants to really have certainty. And so it plays it very safely, very conservative. So stay away, stay in the corner, don't talk to people because, bad things can happen. And so what we have to do is we have to overcome this. And the only way we can overcome this is being mindful of this diagram and this process about what's going on. Because what we often focus on is only the mental formations. We focus on the frustration, the anger, the happiness, and we never look at, what are the perceptions doing? So this prediction is called perception, as Lisa Barrett talks about. And really, what it does, it can be more detailed. So let's take about that balloon that's bursting. If a balloon bursts and back in your past, you got very annoyed because someone came up behind you and popped the balloon. You've had that happen to you, haven't you? Then anytime you hear a balloon burst, you might just get annoyed and not know why. But you know why because it's these past memories and experiences that are coming up. If you'd never heard a balloon burst before, you might just more or less be intrigued by it and just wonder, hey, what was that? That was kind of interesting. Plus your mind being able to make those predictions that it could be a gunshot, which is, kind of a survival thing. So you can see, what is it that's causing your suffering? Now, at White Owl Meditation, I went on Amazon a number of years ago, and I bought a bunch of these mirrors. And so I pass them out. I say, you want to know who's causing your suffering? Look in this thing. It's you. So when we go back to, that makes me crazy, you're making yourself crazy. It's just that you're not realizing it. So another example. This happened to a friend of mine. They went to their 50th high school reunion. And as they're at the reunion, they saw these three women kind of in the background there. And immediately there was a feeling of uneasiness. And then there was a kind of an anger, frustration. And where did that come from? That came from the fact that when they were in high school, these three women happened to be part of that elite clique that this person was excluded from. And so this person told me, I know they'd never change. Didn't even deal with it. I don't even want to talk to them. So actually what's happening, based on a past experience, you can see how this person gets the frustration, the dissatisfaction, and so forth from that particular encounter. So basically, when we suffer, it's because the perception or mental impression from our memories and held beliefs cause unpleasant mental formations to arise that then can lead to a reaction. And as I said before, the reason that we have this reaction is that we're not really looking to see exactly what is behind it. We're just looking at the anger and the frustration. We're not dissecting it and investigating it, which is what mindfulness is all about. Now, those of you that read the introduction to this, on the website, have any of you seen the Jesse Stone series with Tom Selleck? Well, if you like mysteries and so forth, he's a police chief in this small town in Massachusetts. And he had an alcohol problem. He got divorced. His dog died in L.A., so he's in this town. And Selleck is a wonderful actor, but what kind of pervades this thing is that when he's trying to solve a case, he goes back to the saying that when you don't like the answers you're getting, check your premises. As any good detective would do. If we're not finding out who committed that murder or whatever, maybe we make some assumptions, kind of widen the net or whatever. So I paraphrase that basically, when you don't like the mental formations that you're getting, you ought to check your perceptions. That's really it. So in practicing mindfulness I define as this awareness. On this diagram, there's awareness of the experience, and then you go a little bit deeper and you investigate it. So as Bonnie Ganaratara said, mindfulness is paying attention moment to moment to what is. And the what is, you're drawing into the present. So you're saying, okay, what is going on here? And so if you have a feeling, a mental formation of anger or whatever, then go back and say, okay, what's my perception in this case? don't just focus on the anger, because if you just focus on the anger, you're just focusing on a reaction or mental formation going on, and you're not getting to the root of it. So in practicing mindfulness, you can do three things. One is you can ask yourself, what is your perception? What is the perception that's going on here? And then, is it true now? Is it true now? Or am I dealing with a perception that happened 50 years ago? And I forget who said it, but it's like if you get on an airplane, would you like the pilot to be piloting the plane using yesterday's weather report? That's kind of what you're doing, isn't it? You're using past data to guide what you're doing in the present. So, what is a perception? Is it true now? And then thirdly, can you let go of it and be open to possibility? So in this above example, or the one that I gave you about the person being at their 50th high school reunion, could they just investigate and perhaps talk to those people to see exactly, have they changed or whatever? Give it a shot. And I really like to quote T.S. Eliot from the Four Quartets, because I think he said it in just very concise words. What we know of other people is only our memory of the moments during which we knew them, and they have changed since then. We must also remember that at every meeting, we're meeting a stranger. Let me say that again. What we know of other people is only our memory of the moments during which we knew them, and they have changed since then. We must also remember that at every meeting, we're meeting a stranger. So it's kind of a fun practice. Get up tomorrow and just, no matter who you meet, think of them as a stranger. And just see, does that change things at all for you? Particularly with those who you can be, frustrated. Now, it's not saying that that stranger that you meet they may not have changed. And you have your choice. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily deal with them or whatever. But at least you're open to possibility. And you're not dealing with this box, this mummified thing that Lisa Barrett talks about, that's just doing their best to make their prediction, but you're not giving enough data. So what you're really doing to your internal friend here is you're going out and you're giving more data. And you're giving more data so that they can make another kind of prediction, and perhaps a better prediction. If you choose not to investigate, then it's very likely that you'll continue to suffer. Because what is happening is you have an attachment to your perception. It's like that pilot in the airplane. He sees fair weather on his yesterday's weather report, and he doesn't pay attention to Hurricane Florence, which he's flying into the midst of. So basically, perceptions are just predictions, but we hold them as the truth or as fixed beliefs, and that's where we can get into trouble. Any of you heard of Anthony DeMello? He was a Jesuit priest and actually had done a lot of study of Eastern religions. And so when you read DeMello, you think that this guy is not necessarily a Catholic, but really he must have, done the monk's road at some point. But I'd like to read you a couple of quotes. And he states, what is attachment? A need, a clinging that blunts your sensitivity, a drug that clouds your perception, a drug that clouds your perception. That is why as long as you have the slightest attachment for anything or any person, love cannot be born. For love is sensitivity. And sensitivity that is impaired, even in the slightest degree, is sensitivity destroyed. Just as the malfunctioning of one essential piece of the radar set distorts reception and distorts your response to what you perceive. So we have to really figure, we're dealing our senses. As you go older, your eyes don't see as well, you don't hear as well, and so forth. All of that is affecting that mind that's trying to make a prediction. And so what we're doing, we're not helping the mind out at all if we just go on the limited data that the mind is giving us. Now, Lisa Barrett, in her book, also really talks about how we can take care of ourselves, because our perception is also altered by how well we take care of our body. And she really gives a very interesting study. It's an actual study that scientists in Israel were studying judges. And these judges were listening to the prisoners in terms of making parole decisions. And what they found out was that they were less likely to parole a prisoner if the prisoner appeared before lunch. So basically, they were not investigating their perception that perhaps it was they're hungry and their blood sugar was getting a little low, because they found out that after lunch, they went on making parole decisions just like they normally would. So it's really our body, it's a mind-body thing. Our body really has a lot to do with how well our perceptions are as well. And so she recommends, good, healthy advice, eating healthy, exercising, getting enough sleep, and improving your physical surroundings, less noise and crowding, more light and greenery. So these are just common sense things. But think about it, are there various times a day when your perception might not be as accurate as it could be? But it's always really, questioning your perception. Okay, so that's perception. And so what I want to shift now and spend just a little bit of time on going back to the Buddha's teaching and how the Buddha dealt with perception. And so the next book that I'm going to show you here is Bani Ganarattara's Meditation on Perception, 10 Healing Practices to Cultivate Mindfulness. And so in general, we can investigate a specific perception to see if it's true or not. And, just for example, on my way here, I was kind of thinking, what kind of perceptions have I really been dealt with in my life that turned out to be false? And I got to think about, UVA. That was my first job here. I was in primary care in the Department of Internal Medicine and basically put on the tenure track. And my division director was also, I was the second faculty in our division. He just barely got tenure. And so when Bob came up for tenure, I thought I did all the right things and so forth and so on. And the dean called me in. He said, Bob, we think you've done a good job here, but the tenure committee decided they're not going to give you tenure. Now, that doesn't mean you have to leave, because you can stay here as long as you want. And my perception was that, I was a failure. I'd failed. And it really obliterated, all the work that I was doing and what I wanted to be doing. And so that, led to a little bit of depression that lasted for a couple of weeks. And when I look back on it, having gotten tenure was one of the best things that happened to me, because it opened up a number of possibilities, including going on a sabbatical to work for the Kellogg Foundation, to go to the University of Missouri and be a faculty member there and so forth, experiencing a lot of different things. It doesn't mean to say that if I'd have gotten tenure, I wouldn't have had a good lifestyle as well, but I was making really a mountain out of a molehill just because of my perception in terms of that limited data, and that prediction. That perception was all this stuff going on from my past memories and the fact I had to be a big achiever. So it's really, spending the time to investigate that. Well, what Bani G, in this book, he talks about one of the other suttas that the Buddha taught called the Jiramananda Sutta. And Ananda, the Buddha's helper, came to the Buddha one day and he said, the Venerable Jiramananda is suffering. He is really ill. Would you mind going and seeing him? And the Buddha said, well, actually, Ananda, I would like to teach you this teaching, and I would like you to go to see Jiramananda, and if you give him this teaching, then I think he'll be better. And this was on the 10 perceptions. So Ananda went to Jiramananda, gave the teaching, and as the story goes, he was cured. So what are these 10 perceptions? Well, I don't have to have time to go into detail. Like I say, we'll be posting the rest of the talk. But basically, if you have a perception and you're suffering, it was probably one of these 10 perceptions has something to do with it. And so let me just give them to you briefly. The deluded perception could be, there is permanence. There is a self. The body is pure, attractive. Afflictions of the body are remote possibilities. Thoughts of pleasure and ill will are harmless, and the way life is. Craving is the way to pleasure. Suffering is inevitable. The world is delightful. We are our thoughts and we cling to them. We cannot experience our mind. All of those are really diluted perspectives, and what Bonnie G goes in and he talks about what the purified is. And so just to go over those briefly, everything is impermanent. That's one of the three characteristics, and we mentioned that in the meditation. There is a self. Everything is of selfless nature, and that's where meditation and mindfulness practice allows us to see that. The body is pure, attractive. The body is actually impure, and in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha talks about reflecting on the body and the impermanence that we age, and that's just the way life is. Afflictions of the body are remote possibilities. The body is always susceptible to afflictions, injury, and disease. Thoughts of pleasure and ill will are harmless in the way life is. These thoughts are unwholesome and must be abandoned to be at peace. And that's what the Buddha said. You have to abandon your attachments. Craving is the way to pleasure. Well, craving leads to clinging, which causes suffering. And dispassion releases us from that suffering. Suffering is inevitable. Suffering can cease by developing concentration. And of course, you know the saying, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And that's really what the pathway is all about. The world is delightful. Everything in the world is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and of selfless nature. And as I pointed out in our meditation, it's not possible to have lasting satisfaction from anything that's impermanent. So why do we keep attaching ourselves and thinking that it's going to be permanent? That new car you bought, when it got its first dent, think how you felt about it. It was going to happen, it's just a matter of when. We are our thoughts and we cling to them. All mental formations, anger, frustration, joy, dissatisfaction, are impermanent and selfless. And we cannot experience our mind. Well, that's what meditation is about. We can experience our mind, particularly through mindfulness of breathing, insight meditation, and so forth. So I encourage you to really, what I find useful, the way I was taught, was like a talk such as what I'm giving. I find it useful to kind of reflect on it for about a week. And that's why I wanted to make it available to you. You know, you can download it because then you can read it and then get new insights out of that. So when working with perceptions that cause suffering, you can really investigate it, as I mentioned, and you have a choice. You can either keep the perception, you can transform or purify the perception, and that is, you know, I'm thinking that this is permanent. Those women that I saw 50 years ago are never going to change. Or you can transform it to, yes, there's impermanence. Maybe they did change. Or you can just let the perception go. Just let it go. Because it's really not that much useful. The mind is doing perceptions to cause survival. Mother Nature doesn't care about if you feel happy or not. Mother Nature just wants to keep you alive so you can do the Darwin thing, you know, and keep things going in evolution. So basically, it's going back to asking your perception. Is it true, and can it be replaced by a corresponding purified perception? So let me just end by saying that there's that choice, and what about letting go of your perceptions in total? And so just to quote the Dhammapada, when one sees with wisdom that all conditioned things are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and that all of the teachings are without self, then one would be disappointed with suffering, which is the nature of all conditions, conditionings, and conditioned things. So when we realize what our conditioning is doing, we can just let it go. And we can discover that there's a state beyond perception. And the Buddha said, here, Ananda, a bhikkhu, a monk, is percipient thus. This is peaceful. This is sublime. That is the stilling of all activities, the relinquishing of all acquisitions, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. However, it foreshadows the final cessation of perception that accompanies the death of a fully enlightened person. So basically, you don't have to have perceptions, because what we're going for is a sublime peace. And sublime peace doesn't need perceptions. It's going back to that diagram, and you see where there's form, there's consciousness, there's awareness. Can you just let it be at that without conditioning it? Now, naturally, we're going to make judgments and so forth, but the key with mindfulness is to realize that we're making the judgments. And once we realize that we're making the judgments, then we can say, I wonder what it's like without judgment. It's like looking at a sunset. Can you enjoy the sunset and just be with the sunset? Or are you going to be thinking about, it's going to end in 5 minutes, so I better enjoy it as much as I can. I better go get my camera and take a picture of it, so forth and so on. It's really, can we just be with life? So I see really the way we are is that there's kind of 3 stages that we go back and forth. We have what I call the mundane stage, where we're going after sensual pleasures, we're craving things. The second stage is when we're doing meditative practice, we're practicing mindfulness, and we're observing what's going on. But that third stage is what I call pure awareness. We're just being. And all of you have had glimpses of that. But to me, that's what the path is all about. It's just increasing our capacity for being. And any time that we're feeling frustrated or our lives aren't going quite the way they should be, then that's where we need to go back to that second stage and bring mindfulness in and investigate it. And if I had time, I'd be talking about the 7 factors of awakening. But the first 3 factors of awakening are mindfulness, investigation, and putting energy into it. And when you do that, then what you feel is joy, you feel a calmness, you have increased concentration, and then the last thing is you have equanimity. You have that unshakable mind, you feel at peace. Throwing a lot of stuff at you. Let me stop there, and any questions you might have. Well, what I'd recommend, I found is just, if you want to, download the talk and just reflect on it and practice it. And just see if looking at perception rather than at your mental formation might cause a shift for you. That's really what it's all about. Thank you. Great to be with you.